21 top 40 hits, 3 number 1 singles, 11 top 10s in just 6 years. Between 1969 and 1975, Three Dog Night wasn't just successful, they were unstoppable. Joy to the World became Billboard's #1 song of 1971. They had a streak of 18 consecutive top 40 hits, a chart run that made them one of the most played acts on AM radio across America. Then the machine exploded from within. Drug addiction tore through the band like wildfire. Members couldn't stand to be in the same room together. Financial mismanagement drained millions. By 1976, the band that had filled arenas just months earlier simply ceased to exist, broken, bankrupt, and bitterly divided. Decades later, the 3 lead singers who'd created that magical vocal chemistry were still refusing to reconcile, still fighting over the wreckage of what they destroyed. This is the story of how perfect harmony became the ultimate lie. 3 voices that sounded like brotherhood on stage, but hid addiction, ego wars, and resentment so deep that success couldn't mask it anymore. A tale of hit-making brilliance wrecked by the very excess it created. But to understand the collapse, we have to go back to Los Angeles, 1967. Los Angeles in the late 60s was crawling with musicians trying to make it. The city was a feeding ground, hungry artists, predatory managers, and a record industry that chewed up bands and spit them out before breakfast. This wasn't a place where dreams came true easily. It was a place where survival meant being smarter, tighter, and more distinctive than everyone else fighting for the same shot. 3 guys, Danny Hutton, Corey Wells, and Chuck Negron, each came from different musical worlds. Hutton had a pop-soul background, smooth and radio-friendly. Wells brought a gravelly, bluesy bite, the kind of voice that could cut through any mix. Negron came from R&B and doo-wop, with an expressive, emotional lead style that could sell a lyric like nobody's business. When they came together, first under the name Redwood and then as Three Dog Night by 1968, something clicked. Not just clicked, fused. Their 3-part vocal harmonies were tight, lush, almost impossibly balanced. Each brought a distinct timbre, and when they blended, it sounded like one voice split into 3 perfect pieces. Here's what made them different. They weren't a typical rock band. They didn't write their own songs. Instead, they hunted for them. They scoured material from songwriters across genres, Harry Nilsson, Randy Newman, Laura Nyro, picking the strongest melodies, the catchiest hooks, the most emotionally resonant lyrics. Their song selection meetings were treated like A&R work, strategic and ruthless. If it wasn't a hit, it didn't make the cut. Critics hated this approach. A covers band? Where was the artistic integrity? Where was the authenticity? But fans didn't care. Fans wanted songs that moved them, and Three Dog Night delivered those songs better than the people who wrote them. Their 1968 debut album, Three Dog Night, launched them into the mainstream. Then came the breakthrough, One, a Harry Nilsson song that hit #5 in 1969. The harmony arrangement was stunning, the production was lush, and radio stations couldn't stop playing it. Suddenly, Three Dog Night wasn't just another LA band. They were a phenomenon. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already there. See, the three lead singers were the public faces, but they weren't in control. Management made the decisions. Producers shaped the sound. The band members, Joe Skirmy on bass, Floyd Sneed on drums, Jimmy Greenspoon on keyboards, Michael Alsop on guitar, were the engine, the craftsmen who made it all work live. But the spotlight? That belonged to Hutton, Wells, and Negron. And when you've got three frontmen sharing one spotlight, the math gets complicated fast. Nobody was writing the songs. Nobody owned the creative vision. They were interpreters, hired guns in their own band, and that lack of creative control would become a ticking time bomb. Between 1969 and 1972, Three Dog Night became a hit-making machine. Album after album, single after single, the formula worked flawlessly. Find a killer song, arrange those three-part harmonies, add radio-friendly production, release it, watch it climb the charts. 1969, One peaked at number 5. Then came Easy to Be Hard from the musical Hair, another top 5 hit. The debut album went gold, then platinum. The band was everywhere. Major TV shows, festival lineups, sold-out theaters. 1970, It Ain't Easy and Naturally dropped, both loaded with hits. Mama Told Me Not to Come, a Randy Newman song about a wild party seen through innocent eyes, hit number 1. It was quirky, catchy, and massive. Critics dismissed it as novelty pop. Fans made it one of the year's biggest songs. But beneath this triumph, the pressure was building. The band was touring non-stop, arenas, theaters, back-to-back nights in different cities. The demand for new hits was relentless. Radio programmers saw Three Dog Night as a safe bet, a band that delivered consistent singles, and that meant the label wanted more. Always more. What fans didn't see was the lifestyle divergence starting to show. Some members embraced the excess, the drugs, the groupies, the non-stop party that came with being rock stars. Others tried to maintain some semblance of balance. But when you're on the road 200 nights a year, when the money's pouring in and the temptations are everywhere, balance becomes impossible. And that's where the trouble began. 1971, Joy to the World dropped. Jeremiah was a bullfrog. That opening line became iconic, instantly recognizable, burned into the cultural consciousness. The song hit number 1 and stayed there. It became Billboard's year-end number 1 single for 1971. Their biggest hit. Their defining hit. The real cost was building quietly. Chuck Negron, the voice on many of their lead vocals, was diving deeper into drug use. Heroin, cocaine, the heavy stuff, the stuff that doesn't just mess with your performance, it rewires your brain. He was functional for now. He could still sing, still hit the notes, still deliver on stage. But the addiction was growing, consuming more of him every day. The band was making millions, but financial management was a mess. Money was flowing in so fast that nobody bothered to track where it was going. Managers took their cuts. Producers took theirs. Expenses ballooned. And the band? They assumed the money would keep coming forever. 1972 to 1973, more hits. Black and White, a song about racial equality, hit number 1. Another triumph. More tours. more acclaim. They were one of the most commercially successful acts of the era, a band that could do no wrong in the eyes of radio programmers and fans. But the internal responsibility imbalance was becoming impossible to ignore. The three singers were the stars, but the resentments were starting to surface. Who got the lead on which song? Who did the interviews? Who got the credit? And the musicians, Skirmy, Sneed, Greenspoon, Alsop, they were grinding just as hard, playing every night, but the spotlight never moved their way. The lifestyle divergence wasn't just showing anymore. It was screaming. Some members could barely function off stage. Others were holding it together through sheer will. The harmony that sounded so effortless on record? It was a performance, a mask, a beautiful lie covering the rot underneath. By 1974, Three Dog Night had reached their absolute apex. 21 top 40 hits. 11 top 10s. 3 number ones. Gold and platinum albums stacked up like trophies. They were headlining major arenas across North America, pulling crowds that most bands could only dream of. Their catalog was everywhere: radio, jukeboxes, vinyl collections in millions of homes. Picture this: stadium lights, 15,000 fans singing along to Joy to the World, three voices blending in perfect harmony, the kind of moment that feels timeless, untouchable. They'd made it. Not just made it, they dominated. But that moment of glory was also the beginning of the end. Because while they looked unstoppable on stage, everything off stage was cracking. Chuck Negron's addiction wasn't just a problem anymore. It was a crisis. He was high before shows, high after shows, sometimes barely coherent in the studio. The other members knew. Management knew. But as long as he could still perform, as long as the hits kept coming, everyone looked the other way. The money that should have been securing their futures was vanishing. Management and royalty disputes were surfacing, ugly fights over who owned what, who deserved what percentage, where the hell all the money had gone. They'd sold millions of records, but the financial picture was a disaster. Mismanagement, predatory contracts, expenses nobody had bothered to control, it was all coming due. And the personal tensions? They'd moved past passive-aggressive and straight into open hostility. The three lead singers, the guys whose chemistry had built the entire empire, could barely stand to be around each other anymore. Ego clashes, resentment over spotlight distribution, anger over who got credit for the success. The brotherhood was a fiction, and everyone knew it. The breaking point came in 1976. Not with a single catastrophic event, but with a slow-motion implosion that everyone saw coming and nobody could stop. Chuck Negron's addiction had spiraled completely out of control. He wasn't just using anymore, he was gone. Missing rehearsals. Showing up too high to perform. The band had to cancel shows, refund tickets, apologize to fans who'd paid to see them. The voice that had carried so many of their hits, the expressive lead that made songs like Joy to the World unforgettable, was now unreliable at best, unusable at worst. But the addiction wasn't the only trigger. The financial nightmare was exploding. Royalty disputes turned into lawsuits. Band members discovered that the money they thought they'd earned, the millions from record sales, touring, licensing, had been mismanaged, siphoned off, or locked up in legal battles. The trust was shattered. Nobody believed anyone else's version of the story anymore. The lowest moment scene. Imagine a band meeting, late 1975 or early 76. The three lead singers in a room, supposed to be discussing the next album, the next tour, the next phase. Instead, they're screaming at each other. Accusations flying. You're the reason we're failing. You took too much of the spotlight. You let the drugs destroy everything. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. The touring musicians, Skirmy, Sneed, Greenspoon, Alsop, watching this unfold, knowing their paychecks depend on these three guys getting it together, knowing it's not going to happen. The realization sinking in. This is over. And then quietly, inevitably it was. Three Dog Night broke up in 1976. No farewell tour. No final album. No closure for the fans who'd made them stars. Just a dissolution, a band that had been everywhere suddenly nowhere. The charts moved on. Radio moved on. The members scattered, bitter and broken. The immediate consequences were brutal. The money they thought they had? Frozen in legal battles or already spent. Their identity as one of America's biggest bands? Compromised, tarnished by the messy breakup and the stories leaking out about addiction and infighting. The hits kept playing on oldie stations, but the band that made them was gone. And here's the thing that made it worse. They'd built their entire success on other people's songs. They didn't own their catalog in the way bands who write their own material do. The royalties were divided, diluted, fought over. When the band dissolved, they didn't even have that creative ownership to fall back on. So where did they go from there? Chuck Negron's path was the darkest. His addiction consumed him for years. He hit bottom, hard bottom. Lost everything. Lived on the streets at one point. The voice that had sung to millions, that had topped the Billboard charts, was begging for change. It took him years to claw his way back to sobriety, to rebuild some semblance of a life. He eventually wrote a memoir, Three Dog Nightmare, chronicling the addiction and recovery. It was raw, brutal, and honest about the cost of fame. Corey Wells took a different path. He became the guy trying to keep the name alive. He led various reunion lineups, touring intermittently through the 80s, 90s, and beyond. The music industry had moved on. Three Dog Night's brand of radio-friendly pop rock felt dated in the punk era, the new wave era, the grunge era, but nostalgia is lucrative. State fairs, casinos, classic rock festivals. If there was a stage and an audience that remembered joy to the world, Wells was there. Danny Hutton pursued solo projects, other musical ventures, trying to find success outside the shadow of Three Dog Night. Like most of the members' solo careers, it had mixed results. Nobody could recapture the magic of those three voices blending together. Separately, they were good singers. Together, they'd been transcendent. But together was no longer an option. For a while in the 80s, there were reunion attempts. Different lineups touring under the Three Dog Night name, trying to recreate the hits for audiences hungry for nostalgia. It felt like healing, like maybe they'd found a way forward. But the story wasn't over. Decades later, the battle became about legacy and who controlled it. Multiple versions of Three Dog Night started appearing. Different members claimed the right to tour under the name. Lineup changes became so frequent that fans couldn't keep track of who was real and who was just cashing in on the brand. The band's name, their identity, became a contested piece of intellectual property, fought over in legal battles and bitter disputes. Jimmy Greenspoon, the original keyboardist, died in 2015. Corey Wells died the same year. Their deaths didn't bring reconciliation, they brought more fractured lineups, more questions about who had the right to keep performing as Three Dog Night. Joe Skirmy, the original bassist during the band's peak, had died back in 2002. Floyd Sneed, the principal drummer, died in 2023. One by one, the architects of that classic sound were disappearing, and with them, any hope of a true, complete reunion. And then, just weeks ago, Chuck Negron died on February 2, 2026. Major outlets covered it, noting the band's 21 top 40 hits and his key role in their sound. With his death, the last of the three lead singers, the guys whose voices were Three Dog Night, was gone. Here's the sting: they never reconciled. Not really. There were professional reunions, sure, stand on stage together, sing the hits, collect the paycheck. But the brotherhood that fans imagined when they heard those harmonies? That was always an illusion. The tensions from the 70s, the bitterness from the breakup, the resentments over money and credit and who destroyed what? Those wounds never healed. The catalog kept generating revenue. Streaming, licensing for films and TV, best of compilations, vinyl reissues. Joy to the World remained culturally recognizable. People who couldn't name the band could still sing Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog. But the people who created it? They spent their final decades estranged, unable or unwilling to forgive, unable to see past the wreckage of what they'd once built together. Three voices that sounded like unity, like perfect harmony, hiding decades of unresolved pain. So where does that leave Three Dog Night? Various touring lineups continue to perform under the name, keeping the hits alive for audiences who still want to hear them live. The catalog endures, on classic rock radio, on streaming services, in film soundtracks and oldies playlists. The songs outlive the band, which is both a triumph and a tragedy. 21 top 40 hits in 6 years. That's a legacy most artists can only dream of. They proved that a covers-oriented band, built on vocal chemistry and smart song selection rather than original composition, could achieve enormous mainstream success. They were hit interpreters with exceptional vocal chemistry, and for a brief, brilliant window, they owned American radio. But the cost? Staggering. Addiction that nearly killed members. Financial mismanagement that drained millions. Egos and resentments that poisoned relationships beyond repair. A legacy so fractured that multiple versions of the band toured simultaneously, each claiming legitimacy. Critics often summarize Three Dog Night as both a triumph of hitmaking and a cautionary tale about excess and mismanagement. And they're right. The band's story is both. It's a blueprint for how to dominate the charts, and a warning about what happens when you don't control your own destiny, financially, creatively, personally. The harmony that sounded so effortless on stage had wrought so deep that even massive success couldn't cover it up. The system, the touring treadmill, the management structure, the relentless demand for more hits, destroyed the brotherhood before anyone realized it was happening. Their influence persists in later vocal-centric pop-rock acts who prioritize harmony arrangements. Their blend of pop hooks and choral vocals still yields airplay decades later. They're a frequently cited example of how to build a hit factory, even if the factory eventually collapsed under its own weight. And maybe that's the real lesson. You can have perfect harmony and still be falling apart. You can fill arenas and top the charts and still be losing everything that matters. Success doesn't fix broken people. It just gives them a bigger stage to break on. So here's my question for you. What part of this story hits you the most? Was it Chuck Negron's addiction spiral and redemption? The bitter reality that those three voices never truly reconciled? Or maybe you saw Three Dog Night live back in the day. Tell me about it. What was it like hearing those harmonies in person? Drop your memories, your thoughts, your favorite Three Dog Night deep cut in the comments below. If you want more stories about the bands that defined an era, the meteoric rises, the catastrophic falls, the complicated legacies, hit that subscribe button. We've got more rise and fall episodes coming, and some of these stories make Three Dog Night look tame by comparison. Thanks for watching. And remember, Jeremiah was a bullfrog, even if the band that sang it couldn't stay together long enough to enjoy what they'd created.